Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 849. This is for the 25th of April, 2022. The magical, marvelous time where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say really outrageous things. We're going to carry on the discussion from last Monday night. If you listened or watched, we had a spotter training session, which was great. And then we got into a discussion about the current state of the U.S. watch warning system. Is it deteriorating? Is it in trouble? Are we going in the wrong direction? Do we need to stop the use of the word tornado emergency, and all these things? And I felt like it was rushed, and we just didn't have a lot of time to finish. And we're going to carry on that discussion tonight with some pretty important people within the National Weather Service and within the weather enterprise. I'm very, very much looking forward to this. But we got to invite everybody and get them on the show here. So I think Dr. Neil Jacobs said he had to note his internet service was out. I understand there's been some fairly significant outages around parts of the country. Hopefully he'll be able to find some connectivity here. So we are going to add everybody. And let's see if we can get everybody on the line. All right, so they have now been invited. We have the embed code over on the server, so we're good to go for the television side. Got a few thunderstorms west of me in our television market, but they are puny, weak, and in the words of the great Kevin Laws, who will be on the show tonight, it's junk convection. Kevin will be on the show tonight. Kevin is the SOO, the Science Operations Officer for the National Weather Service in Birmingham, and very smart guy. And I really welcome his views on the state of the warning process. We'll have some others as well, and always good to hear from our own people too. But it all follows the debacle in Arkansas a couple of Friday nights ago, where there was a tornado emergency and there was no tornado. And in theory, you should never have a false alarm for a tornado emergency. But we had one that night, and it was based primarily on a false report or two. And, we've heard different stories, but apparently there's a chance there could have been some malicious intent. Somebody was trying to harm the system that night. And we're not faulting anybody. It's not what we're doing here. Playing the blame game, that's not constructive. Whenever something like that happens, we have to take a look at it and work together to try and come up with a systemic change where it doesn't happen again. And when you see something like that, there's something maybe wrong within the system. So, and again, I think for everybody here, we just want to make everything better. And we're coming up on the super outbreak anniversary of 2011, which is what, Bill? Wednesday, right?
Right, correct. 27. It's hard to believe. Hard to believe it's been that long, and hard to believe it just happened too. It's one of those weird things.
So, so this is a good week to talk about this. Bill, you got the right mic on there. You sound a little hot.
I just do that every week, so you'll say that. I guess it's just these AirPods they must be pretty good, James. We switch to the other ones. They're a little. Let's actually change the volume somehow here on this Zoom thing. Maybe. Audio settings. Input level. I'll bring it down a hair. Well,
Bill's he's got a $10,000 microphone there, but he doesn't use it.
I know.
I mean, Jen, what's the deal? He will not use his $10,000 mic. He wants to use the, $10 headsets.
I don't, but you know what? I have a mic too, but I'm in my kitchen.
Oh, so you're on the $10 headset. The
exactly.
$10 headsets, they don't sound bad.
No.
They
I
really
just like
don't.
being-
Yeah, when it's me, they sound terrible. When it's Jen, they sound like a basket of warm kittens. or
Oh,
something.
that's so nice.
So James,
So-
am I still as hot now?
That's much better. That's
Okay, cheaper
much
one
better.
version back AirPods. There you go.
So
Well, actually, I found the place to maybe. Yeah, I think I was actually coming out of the camera on that last one.
yeah, the if you've got a Logitech Stream Cam, the audio is horrible in those things. It sounds like you're in a stall in the airport in Kansas City or something.
That's probably happened before.
Because I've got the same thing, and at one time I had it accidentally turned on, and it just sounded horrible. So
Well, thank you for letting me know.
now, yeah, your audio sounds really good now. So you're back on the.
Yeah, I got my big beautiful microphone over here, but it's too much trouble to hook it up to the docking station. Ugh. It's either that or have a good time capsule backup. So I'm choosing the backup right now.
There's an odd odor of there's a burning smell in this room. So if this place goes up in flames, y'all just keep on going.
Oh no.
There was an
No,
odd odor when I walked in too, but I took the trash out and it smelled a lot better.
Don't say. They want to think
And
about
that would-
brushing your teeth.
Yeah, really. That would be a great show title is odd odor, but we can't use
No,
a
that's
show
Probably been
title
used before.
right. We can't use a
probably-
show title until the show actually begins.
You said something about some fifth graders smelled bad or something. Our sixth graders smelled bad on one show. I got an ugly email about it.
Well, what do you mean? They do smell bad. I mean, if anybody's got a problem with that statement, you tell them to come see me. I mean, and here's the worst part about sixth graders. So they'll go, they'll go play baseball or practice or go to PE. And what do they do after that? They spray themselves down with Axe. That is the absolute worst. The combination of BO and Axe going on at the same time. I mean, it is an absolute cesspool. So,
Oh my goodness.
and then I'm telling you, my truck out here still smells bad from when our youngest was in the sixth grade, I think. So, it's a bad combination. And I'm trying to get all this out before the TV people join us at the top of the hour. Those master control guys say, what are you talking about? They'll hit the show right at the very top and we'll be talking about something outrageous like that. But I remind them this is the pre-show where we do say outrageous things.
Mhm.
Stephen, can you hear us okay? Are you good?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
Yes, sir. Thank you
Awesome.
for joining us.
Give
Kevin
me
Walsh,
the
can you hear us
cor-
okay?
Yeah, Yes, I can hear you sir. guys loud and clear.
And
Okay.
if you would
Hey,
give me the
Stephen.
correct pronunciation of your last name, Stephen.
Stefan Beta.
Stefan Beda. Thank you.
All right. So we're here. It's the top of the hour. Welcome to our television viewers. We are going to get this thing started, our Monday night weather party. As we're going to have a good discussion tonight. All right. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a NOAA Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service. And the AMS Weather Band.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
WeatherBrains, episode number 849. This is for the 25th of April, 2022. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We are glad you are here. We're going to carry on an important discussion that we started on this show last week. And looking over the group here, I know we've got Dr. Jacobs does not have internet bandwidth. Jen, how does the smartest guy on the show always wind up with the internet problems? He can't get online. We've had this problem forever since the show started. The higher the IQ, the harder it is to get online. But
Yeah, that's him and about a million to other people. And if he's in Florida right now, it's a huge outage. There was a network line cut or something. And so all like Central and South Florida, all out of internet from Xfinity.
wow.
Yeah,
Goodness
it's
gracious.
huge. So I don't know.
Well,
Hopefully
I was
he can
so
join us.
hoping that he would be on the show because I would love to hear his input, but that stuff happens. But Jen, how are you? How's things in Ohio?
I'm doing good. Front came through and it's cooled off quite a bit. I had to get back into the sweatshirt, but it was gorgeous this weekend. It was so beautiful and it was warm, and now it's gotten a little cool again. And Monday kicked in at about 4 o'clock. Things have been really weird since about 4 o'clock today. So, but I'm all good. I'm all smiles, and just glad to see everybody tonight to continue this great discussion. We've seen a lot of great feedback on social media on this, and people are like, we want to hear more. So we're going to tonight, that's for sure.
Right. And we just ran out of time last week. And this week, we're just going to take the whole show and talk about the state of the United States severe weather warning, process, the system. Where are we? Is it getting better, worse? Do we need to make changes? And the situation in Arkansas gave us a chance to talk about it. And we want to do it in a positive way. We're not here to criticize anybody or tear anybody down. We just want to make the system better. Mm-hmm. And I see Kim just joined us. Kim, I know you've been so busy. How are you? And tell us how things are going in your family.
Yeah, and thank you. And thank you to the people who've been concerned. If you listened to the pre-show, not last week, but the week before, you might have heard me mention one of my kids was in the hospital, which is really rough when you're a year and a half old. It's not for any of us, but especially someone so little. So the good news is that she's doing much, much better now. So we're home. Things are looking better. We're still trying to dig ourselves out and recover our lives. But you know what? If we have everybody home and healthy, everything else is possible. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, everything just stops when something like that happens, and priorities kind of change a little bit. But I'm glad you're home. I'm glad everybody is doing okay. That's great news, Kim. And I'm glad you're here because we will greatly appreciate your input tonight. Let's go down to Texas and Troy. You had any rain down there? A little rain in the Austin area?
Yeah, we actually did today. In fact, after a very dry spring so far, we camp actually out at Austin Bergstrom International Airport today, at least tentatively. We're not up to midnight yet, of course, but 1.96 of rainfall, and that sets a brand new rainfall record. Goes back to the Bergstrom Air Force Base days back in 1980 on April 25th, and that total was 1.75. So we beat that one out just a bit. Camp Mabry, our in-city climate site, the ASOS out there had 1.55 inches of rain. And I got to tell you, people were dancing in the streets today in Austin. It wasn't what we needed, Rick, to break the back of this drought in Texas, but at least it took the edge off of things.
Yeah, you got to start chipping away. That's great
and
news.
one thing too, James, it's real interesting since Jen mentioned it, is how cool it's been here. Right now in Austin, it's 64. Out at Bergstrom, 63 at Camp Mabry. Folks, our average high, 30-year average high for this time of year in Austin is about 82 or 83. So we're about 20 degrees below right now. We should be at this time of day for this time of year. So I'll take this. Of course, it'll be 137 by the weekend, but but nevertheless, at least a little break, and we welcome that in Austin.
And that's our working show title, 137 by the weekend.
By the weekend.
Right? So, Rick Smith, you had some excitement Saturday night. In the words of Elton John, Saturday night's all right for fighting and all right for tornado warnings. That was kind of scary for a while, wasn't it?
It was very scary. I mean, if we'd had just a little bit more moisture and instability and things have been tweaked just up one more notch, I probably wouldn't be here tonight. I would probably be out doing other things. No, never mind.
Yeah, we know what you mean.
But your house was in the path of one of these things, right, Rick?
Well, it went what looked like a big ball on the end of a hook echo went right over my house, and
that's not
right
good.
over the weather center. So I've been out surveying damage the past 2 days, and if you have to survey damage, these surveys were the best kind of surveys where you have to look really hard to find anything at all. So I would rather do those than the other ones.
And real quick, the results, we had one EF0, right, in that?
Yeah, we had a EF0 out just not too far west of me around Tuttle. There's always debate, but there's debate going on about that. But looks like just not much damage at all. Today I surveyed around Pauls Valley and Lawton. Lawton was damaging wind. Pauls Valley was probably a weak tornado embedded in it was at the apex of a bow echo. So there may have been a weak tornado. Just the detective work out there looking for any signs of a circulation is always interesting. But yeah, we're slowly racking up the numbers. But yeah, it looks like Friday we may have another shot.
Yeah, I was looking at that Friday outlook from SPC. But Bill Murray, we got an important guest or two here, so let's bring them in and let's get this thing going.
Yeah, first, James, I'll introduce our guest panelist tonight. He's a friend of the show, needs no introduction. He is the Science and Operations Officer at the National Weather Service in Birmingham, and a hero to Central Alabamians who have appreciated his work with his team there in terms of reducing false alarm ratios and keeping the POD, the probability of detection, intact. Kevin Laws, welcome back to the show. Kevin's muted.
You okay?
Let me unmute.
There we go.
Good to be back.
Yes.
How are you?
We have to. This is obligatory. We have to do
Neil-
that at least once a show, Kevin. It's part of every Zoom
That's going to be
conversation.
me. That's going to be me. I was thinking about Neil, what you said about Neil Jacobs. The smarter you are, you stay off the internet. That's the whole point, isn't it? I mean, that's where the double.
Bingo. Exactly.
Right.
He does it for a reason. Yeah.
And of course,
But
during our
it's been a crazy spring, has it not, for us?
it
I think we're sitting at
has.
47 for Central Alabama, and we average around 30, 32, and I think we're sitting at 47. So we're about 17 above average.
And that's just in your CWA, right? That doesn't count Huntsville and Mobile, Tallahassee. So
39 counties behind me. Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kevin, we're glad you're with us tonight. You chimed in last week as we were ending our conversation. We want to really hear what you have to say tonight too. So thank you for being with us. Hope you and your family are doing well.
Yes, sir. Doing great.
Thanks for being here. Well, our guest WeatherBrain tonight is a new person to a lot of us, but he's a real up and comer in the National Weather Service. He has a series of jobs that are very, very impressive, including being the National Science and Operations Officer for the National Weather Service. And I'm taking this from your LinkedIn page, Stefan. He's also developmental and operational hydrologist and is the alerting initiative lead for the National Weather Service, in addition to some responsibilities that he has with the AMS. But we welcome tonight Dr. Stefan Bida to the show. Stefan, thank you for being here with us tonight. You chimed in after our conversation last week too, and it got you the golden ticket to be on the show tonight. So I don't know whether that was good or bad, but we're really glad to have you here. Looking at your background, it's really, really fascinating. I'd like you to spend some time telling us a little bit about you so we can get to know you and learn from your career.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be on the show this evening, and thank you for having me on.
And we lost it.
Sounds like the Verizon outage may have made it to
yeah.
Dr. Bida's house.
Stefan,
Can you hear me now?
You might want to turn your camera off, and that will probably help. It sounds like the bandwidth is restrained at your location. So, and most people listen, so that would maybe solve the problem. So start over. Go ahead now. We should be able to hear you now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Anyway, well, I'll just start off by saying thank you for having me on the show. Apologies for that technical difficulty. And also thank you to have Kevin here and Rick. Hopefully both of you guys get a little bit of reprieve here from all this severe weather lately. It's been a never-ending hit show basically for both of your CWAs. So as you mentioned, I am the National Science and Operations Officer. I've been in the Weather Service since about 2013, where I got my start as the meteorologist at Pendleton, Oregon. Served for a brief time there as the acting SU before moving on to Amarillo, Texas to serve as the SU there for about 6 years. So a lot of my work that I've been doing for the National Weather Service has basically focused on training, updating operations. Unfortunately, because of all the droughts that Texas has been having, big time of my focus was evolving fire weather services to help us see what we can do to better inform our fire partners so that they can have a better day as it was. In fact, I'm working very closely with Todd Lindley over in Norman, Oklahoma on quite a number of projects in that arena. And then also I try to stay up to date on the latest state of the science. And so here at the national level, Multiple conversations that I have usually involve the National Severe Storms Lab, the Office of Atmospheric Research, University of Oklahoma, all the major universities and major weather programs I usually have conversations with in order to help transition some of their projects over to operations. And so that's where I sit here on the national level, and also help keep tabs on our 141 SUs and DOEs throughout the entirety of the United States. So it's never a dull moment here as I try to keep up with things.
I heard a new term in there. We talk frequently to science and operation officers like Kevin and like you, Stefan. What did you say? SUs and DOEs? I think that's a new term to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So DOEs are development and operations hydrologists, and they work at the river forecast centers. So they're the hydrological equivalent to the SUs at the weather forecast offices. And so their jobs are quite similar, where they try to train their operations hydrologists on the latest techniques that are out there, and also to help them keep up to date on the latest hydrology techniques for forecasting river basins and helping the WFOs with various outputs for river basins as things evolve in their CWAs. So there are 13 of them across the entire United States, and usually I keep close tabs with each of them.
I've heard it said that the SU is sort of the chief science advisor for the MIC and for the office. Would you agree or disagree with that? And Kevin, you can chime in too. Tell how that interaction works a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So for the SU basically is the chief science advisor to the meteorologist in charge. It's in our job description that we are basically kind of like the science director of the office, to be able to help keep up with everything that's going on, whether that's through journal review articles or trying to do training through what is known as the Weather Event Simulator, amongst many other things. And then I defer to Kevin to give more recent examples of what he does at a weather forecast office.
Yeah, I think when it started, the idea was to sort of be the trainer and like you said, science advisor, Bill, and it sort of evolved as the administration tasks go up, and probably the other things, unfortunately, like the meteorology, go down. So it's sort of a catch-all to everything from administration. Like right now, I'm having to pay bills, for example, in the office because we are down an administrative assistant here. But I kind of think of it like as time has gone on, I spend probably a lot less time in training and more time in operations. So it's more, you have two sides of the house. You have a SU and then you have the WCM side. And I like to think of things that the SU kind of oversees what happens in these four walls and the WFO. And then the WCM sort of oversees what happens outside of these four walls, if that makes any sense. So I sort of try to deal with the warnings, the products, the forecasts, integrity here. And then he deals with it if you got a problem getting it on your phone, or the EMs have a problem with our service, or if DSS, decision support services, need to have it on the field, the WCM sort of takes it that side of the house. So that's the way it's sort of divided nowadays.
Yeah, and I imagine things are a lot different now that you can have people back in the office and do in-person meetings. I guess for you, Kevin, Rick, for you also, and I guess for you too, Stefan. I mean, even in that national position, it's nice to have face-to-faces again after the pandemic is, at least the peak of it is, we're past it.
Yeah, it's going to be nice to be able to return back to the office and have those face-to-face conversations with the program managers. I've been doing a lot of travel recently. I just went to our SU development course in the first week of March to help welcome almost 21 new SUs and DOEs onto their jobs. Because this is a era of change within our agency, with a lot of folks moving on to new roles and responsibilities, and it's a changing workforce as we continue. So it's both kind of overwhelming, but also very exciting to see where our future is going to be with the agency.
Well, spend a few moments and tell us about your career and how you got interested in weather, and then how your educational experience unfolded, and how that dovetailed into your operational experience.
Absolutely. So I grew up in the desert Southwest. I actually grew up near Fort Huachuca, Arizona. My dad used to be with the U.S. Air Force. He later became a chief meteorologist at Fort Huachuca. So, already having that in the household is already a huge step forward to try to become interested in meteorology. But what really drew me in was my interest in lightning and trying to understand what's the cause of it. I had myself and my dog at the time had a very close call. It was first lightning strike from a thunderstorm where it's rather unassuming outside, not much out there going on, and then next thing you know, you have a lightning strike no more than like 50 feet away from you. And so that was kind of the spark of inspiration, if you will. I said, you know what, I really want to learn about this. I really want to dig into this. And then so from there, all the way through high school, I always knew I had an interest in being a meteorologist. And where that was, I didn't quite know yet. Once I got through the University of Arizona, which is where I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, it was all focused on doing a lot of work with the North America monsoon experiment. And I had a lot of great mentors there at the University of Arizona. Dr. Christopher Castro was one of them. He was my master's thesis advisor, and Dr. Andrew Comrie was my PhD advisor, both of who helped guide me into to things like hazard communication or being able to understand fire weather, and also trying to be able to figure out synoptic climatology of the monsoon season. So that was where I got a lot of my start. And then from there in 2009, my federal career started with the U.S. Air Force, where I served in 2 roles there, one of which was Science and Operations Officer, because they wanted to see what it was like to emulate that role with the 25th Operational Weather Squadron. And then shortly afterwards, I was promoted to the Director of Training Operations. And so research to operations, training, and doing all sorts of things with regards to trying to make sure our forecasters have the tools that they need to be able to perform their job has been pretty much a hallmark of my career over the last 13 years.
You spent most of your educational career, if not all of it, at Arizona.
Yes, sir.
At the University of Arizona, correct? Talk about that experience there. Give a little pitch for the climatology and meteorology program there.
Yeah, so most recently, the Atmospheric Sciences program did combine into what is known as Hydrologic and Atmospheric Sciences. It's otherwise known as HAZ at haz.arizona.edu. So they saw the ingenuity that we need to really start focusing on hydrometeorology because of a lot of things that we saw with regards to flash flood deaths in the area. In fact, that's one of the major issues that we have out west, is people making that decision to cross those riverbeds, even when you can clearly see it's not safe to do so, people still do so. And so a lot of research is done at the University of Arizona in that direction of monsoon work. Climate change is also becoming a big focus for the university because of all the wildfires that have been happening out in the western United States, and to see what happens to the evolution of the monsoon season, because we've seen a few of those seasons fail over the last few years. And unfortunately, we got all the smoke from it as a result of those continuing monsoon season failures and all the droughts that have been occurring out west. So when it comes to droughts, I used to be on the Texas drought monitor calls and being able to assess those. And it's been a rather depressing set of years. 2017 was one of the worst fire seasons of my career, where we burned over 1 million acres in one day. March 6, 2017 will always be seared in my mind. And one of the things that during my 6 years in Amarillo, more fatalities occurred as a result of wildfires than ever occurred due to severe weather, whether they be tornadoes, hail, exposure to severe weather. And that's where a lot of my passion went towards, is that we need to really get to the bottom of this issue. And I'm grateful to have found some like-minded individuals, especially in the Sioux and Norman, who I worked very closely with. And there's a lot of other state and partner agencies in Kansas, Texas, and Oklahoma that I got to know during my time there. In fact, I did have a brief stint as an incident meteorologist for a time in Pendleton, Oregon. So being able to communicate and convey the information and see how it's used in real time, I find is a rather fulfilling experience.
Talk about that, about the opportunity that you had in that IMET role, because some of our listeners recently have asked about that, wanting to hear more about what that's like and share some experiences from that.
Sure. So the fire that I got to deploy on was one of the largest at the time in Washington State history. It was actually called the Carlton Complex. Deployed in July of 2014, last 2 weeks of July. And one of the things about being an incident meteorologist is you tend to deploy with a type 1 or type 2 incident management team. And these are the best of the best when it comes to firefighters. They have all the tactics, they have years of training in regards to how they're going to handle wildfires in complex terrain, and more recently in not so complex terrain like in the high plains. And your days are long. It was not unusual for me to have 16, 18-hour days during my deployment, which was almost 14 days. So you wake up at about 5 o'clock in the morning, you review your weather data to be able to brief the crew of wildland firefighters who are going to go out for the day shift, which for them is 12 hours. So you wake up at 5, you brief them at 6. Shortly afterwards, you get your breakfast, and then you settle down for the day and provide an innumerable amount of spot forecasts for all the divisions of the wildfire, which can be quite hectic at times. You're also on the wildfire. You are the one that could issue local warnings. And I did have the opportunity to issue local red flag warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings to get those firefighters off the line and be able to be safe as a result of it. In fact, I was told that because of a severe thunderstorm warning we issued locally, that all the wildfire land firefighters had gotten off the line and the slope had just failed. If they had not been informed of that, they would have potentially been involved in that situation. And it's those types of things that you hear about that you realize that your forecast means a lot to what they do every day, even to this day. In fact, in those offices where they may not get an incident management team locally, the WFOs serve that capacity during those times of active wildfires across fast-moving regions. And they have said time and again that we're basically like an additional tactical force for them on the line. And if it wasn't for us in an innumerable amount of situations, sometimes they have indicated they may not have been as ready as they would have for those major situations.
Yeah, that's.
Hey, Bill, let me interrupt here.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
To us east of the Mississippi here, we don't deal with a lot of these issues that those folks out west do. And I'm talking from Oklahoma westward. And you know, I've known Stephen a long time, right? I mean, I've known you probably since you got in, and we've talked about these issues. And I'm a huge kudos to the work that he's done to support that program, because it is a lifeblood to those folks out there in the Rockies on the West Coast. I mean, it is a serious. It is just as serious, if not more so, than the tornado outbreaks that we deal with here. And that's something that really gets overlooked and overshadowed a lot in our agency. And he's done a great job of bringing that to the foreground and to shed some light on how important that program is. And I really appreciate it, because those people out there really depend on those forecasts and those warnings that they give out there, just as much, if not more so, than the tornado warnings we do here.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the support. And I'd like to give a moment to Rick to give him a chance to convey some of the feedback that he's heard about some of the efforts that we've been involved with when it comes to wildland fires. Because, Norman, of course, well known for tornadoes and severe weather, but also, unfortunately, as of late, well known for a lot of wildfires. And Rick, I offer the floor to you for some of the feedback you've heard.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being on. Yeah, I mean, Todd Lindley, who's our SUE, I don't know, I think he's an internationally recognized expert on this, and we're so proud to have him, and we're never letting him leave to go anywhere. But he's done a lot of work, and we're one of the first offices that there's a product that we have called a fire warning that we issue at the request of local emergency managers. I think one of the most rewarding things, though, is the work that we've been doing with these, what we call hotspot notifications, where we identify a potential fire using satellite, sometimes radar, but usually satellite, and we provide that information in a text message format to the state emergency management, and then they fan that out to local fire departments, regional EM coordinators, and things like that. And it's amazing, some of the feedback. I know Amarillo got some similar feedback, Stephen, when you were there, but just hearing that these firemen, these fire chiefs, and task force and anybody else is battling the fire, they got their first notification of a potential fire was from us. And sometimes they get it 20 minutes or more before the first 911 call comes in. Often when they get this hotspot notification from our office or the Amarillo office or whoever, they had no idea there was even a fire there. So they're able to respond to it more quickly and get them under control, hopefully more quickly. So that's very rewarding when that kind of thing happens.
Thank you, Rick, for conveying that. And to add a little further to that, Congress has passed a law that required us to look at some supplemental funds for fire weather that we're currently trying to investigate where to put that. So it's becoming a more significant issue with time when it comes to that aspect of the hazard that we're looking at. And hopefully we'll be able to make some significant advances and bring in some good best practices that we've heard from our partners and from all the offices that have had successful best practices resulting from it.
Let me just jump in real quick. Stefan, we're glad you're at headquarters because, as you know, there's differing opinions about what our role should be in the fire weather world. And so we're glad to have an advocate there and somebody who's been on the front lines of that to kind of be able to at least speak to that. So we're glad you're there.
It's an honor to be here, and it's always an honor to be able to speak towards what we can do for our agency that is for the better, because I'm a fundamental believer of mission first, people always.
It seems kind of incredulous to me that there would be any debate about that. So talk about where that debate might come from and what the argument would be to changing the Weather Service's role in that process.
Uh-oh, sorry, Stefan. I got to go.
Rick's internet just went out.
Don't be scared.
Well, since I mentioned it, I probably won't talk too much about it, but it's, some people don't see fire weather as weather. Some people see fire as something separate from what we do. Our job is to forecast the weather, and that the fire behavior and other things like that should be left to the fire behavior experts. And I don't argue with that, but our mission is also the protection of life and property. And by issuing those hotspot notifications, our argument is always, well, there's no better example of decision support services than that, in my opinion. So, that's just a difference of opinion among some people about what our specific role is in the fire weather world. And I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Well, it seems like they're inextricably related. Go back to Sebastian Junger's book, fire, and in that fire, it's clear weather is critical. Stefan, did you want to expand on that at all, or discuss that any further?
Yeah, so when it comes to fire weather, we're starting to explore a concept known as facets for fire weather. So facets is known as forecasting a continuum of environmental threats. And I know Kim knows this quite well because we've had innumerable amount of conversations since I've arrived in the last 8 months to talk about what's that next step that we take. And two of the facets include being able to provide usable output and effective response. And so one of the things, especially when it comes to fire weather, is I'm trying to find examples and explorations to see what do our partners desire and what does it take for them to be able to have an effective response to the threats that they are seeing, whether that's in the complex terrain of the Western United States, the high plains. Even more recently, I've seen some wildfires break out in North Carolina and Tennessee, unfortunately overtaking some homes in Tennessee. So as the threats of climate change introduce these more extreme precipitation types, where you have more extreme precipitation on one hand, but also longer periods without precipitation, it's becoming something that we have to look into much more closely, is to try to figure out what can we do for the fire weather aspect in order to be able to provide the best services possible. And I see that Kim might have a statement to that.
Yeah, Phil is asking me if I wanted to jump in on this, and I mentioned that fire in particular isn't my bailiwick. I appreciate you bringing up the facets concept, and I think, all those principles are transcendent across all these hazards. fire is so interesting in our field for so many reasons. It's starting to really catch on as a part of the, we should be concerned about with severe weather. It is its own kind of environment that can produce a hazard that is devastating to people and communities. And the Facets paradigm can really be applied to it. I was wondering if you can comment a little bit about in the fire weather space. It's been my impression, maybe mistakenly, but it's been my impression that part of the challenge has been this definitional issue, that Rick was talking about, is fire. Part of our forecasting duty is fire weather. But I also feel that there are just a lot of other agencies that are kind of in that space of, fire prediction, fire management. We get a lot of our information about things like fuels and surface properties that can also help us to understand fire threat from other people. So, it's kind of like with flooding, it's one of these pernicious, difficult to understand and map hazards that we're not just counting on what the atmosphere is doing. We're counting on what the land is doing. And that makes it more complex to manage. And I feel like that's part of the fire story, that we have this legacy of the Weather Service doing some things and then other agencies doing a lot of other things. And maybe that can be something that you comment on about this space.
Well, when it comes to the fire behavior triangle, we know that there's 3 different aspects that come into play. The first of which is weather, the second of which is topography, and the last of which is fuels. And when it comes to fuels, we know that we're not experts in the fuels when it comes to fire weather. That's why we turn to the GACs, for instance, the Geographical Area Coordination Centers, for that information, or the state forestry agencies, who themselves have a lot of time and ability to be able to analyze that space. Obviously, we know a little bit about the topography when it comes to how the area works, when it comes to local climatology, when it comes to upslope, downslope winds, and upslope, up valley, down valley winds. But we are the experts when it comes to the weather aspect of it. And a lot of what I feel that Facets is going to be able to take us is it's going to allow us to have this conversation as to where do we wish to have the end state for fire weather or any other hazard program for that matter. How does that look? So, for example, in the severe weather program, we have 2 aspects that's currently being explored, one of which is known as threats in motion, where a warning polygon is issued for severe or tornado warning, and yet in order to update it for every area outside of that polygon, you have to issue a new warning. So what's being worked on right now is can we and should we have the ability to issue that polygon further downstream, so if you update the warning, the polygon expands and makes the service more equitable. People have more lead time than they would if we issue one polygon up until we get to the edge and then you issue another polygon. The same also can be said about severe weather. So we've had a lot of conversations on the severe weather side about the tags that you see and a lot of the alerts. So the considerable and catastrophic tags that come into play, where you're looking at issuing an alert and say you have 80 mile an hour winds for a severe thunderstorm. Well, that's capable of causing tornadic damage. And so a tag that appropriately describes that will hopefully put people into action. And that's another question in and of itself, is how effective is that tag? And that's where the social sciences side is coming into play. The National Weather Service and the Office of Science and Technology has also established a social science, an SBES, if you will, social, behavioral, and economic sciences portion, in order to bring in the social scientists that can help us explore that very question. Is the information that we're conveying actionable enough? And if not, how do we make it so that the information is actionable? And so we do a lot of work with OAR, Office of Atmospheric Research, in that arena. And it's definitely a whole new space when you're thinking about this, because our science has advanced to the point now where we're fairly accurate in terms of getting out that information. James Spann goes on TV, he confidently says, this is where the polygon is, the storm is moving, this person. And so now the question has become, well, how do we get to those people that may not necessarily have access to a cell phone, just because they don't have the economic means to do so. How do we convey the message for those folks that live in a mobile home that equally themselves may not have access to the appropriate information, or may not even have the TV to be able to listen to someone like James Spann convey that alerting information? So these are all things that we are now having to explore within the Facets paradigm that I feel some discussions have been quite exciting. I mean, this is a different arena of conversation because we're realizing that we're getting pretty darn good at how we convey the forecast for severe fire or whatever the hazard may be. We're now getting to the point is how do we change and get that information so that it's actionable?
And how far away are we from that becoming a reality in some format, Stefan?
So right now we are currently, we do have a series of dashboards that we're currently exploring through the University of Oklahoma. I'm trying to pull up that information very quick for you because that's actually one of the more recent things. It's called the Severe Weather and Society Dashboard. And what that's there for is once it's available, it'll be designed to help forecasters and core partners understand what the vulnerabilities are in specific areas so that the offices can hopefully develop a public education and risk communication strategy that may not just be your standard, okay, we're going to go out here, we're going to give a spotter talk. We may need to have further conversations about the fact that the folks here in this area don't understand the concept of a warning. If that's the case, then we have a whole other situation where we have to be able to work with our partners, emergency managers and such in order to be able to make it so that at least we can convey that level of understanding. And of course, you know, this is a unified partnership. It's not just the SUs or the DOEs for that matter. It's actually the WCMs or SEHs, which is a hydrologic equivalent of what Rick does, the service coordination hydrologists. This is definitely a new arena for a lot of us, and we're continuing to explore. We, in fact, just recently had some calls for funding for research grants that are currently exploring this very topic.
Now, Stefan, back on April the 15th, that Friday night, there's a situation in Arkansas where a tornado warning, turned into a tornado emergency. And we talked about this a lot last week. And it's part of why we wanted to, have a conversation further about it tonight. First, Rick, I'd like you to talk about Spotter Network for a moment and changes that have happened, if you can share some of that information publicly.
Sure. Yeah, I'm one of the Weather Service liaisons to Spotter Network, and Spotter Network takes this stuff very seriously. So there was a lot of stuff going on with spotter reports and tornado emergencies and wedges and fake reports and things like that. And two events were kind of getting confused. April 11th, there was a severe weather event where Little Rock issued a tornado emergency. And then there was that one on the 15th. There were several false reports submitted through Spotter Network on the April 11th event, both to Tulsa and to Little Rock. One of those reports to Little Rock may have contributed, I don't know if it did or not, but it was like a large wedge tornado during about the time one of those tornado emergencies was going on. So when that kind of thing happens, I mean, you can't just jump on Spotter Network anonymously. You have to register, you have to have use your real name and have an email address and provide a phone number that the Weather Service can call. And so as soon as they find out something's wrong, they go investigate, and the person, I don't know what they said. They said their phone was hacked or something, but anyway, the person's no longer on Spotter Network. They're banned from that because they were found to be making false reports. There were no false reports filed via Spotter Network on the 15th. There was only one Spotter Network report that whole event, and it was found to be valid. It turns out Spotter Network used to have two different ways of submitting a report. You could do it on their webpage, or you could do it through RadarScope. There's more than that, but those are the main two. Through RadarScope, your location and time, it's hardwired in there. So when you make a report, it knows where you made the report from and what time it was. On the web interface, it was different. You could actually change the location on that. So that's, and I'm not sure why that was. I can't remember the background on that. But so if I was at my house here and wanted to report a tornado 2 miles from here, I could move my cursor 2 miles from here to say where the tornado was, I guess. I don't know. That's one use for it. And if you've ever seen those tributes, like where they'll put Bill Paxton's initials across Waukeeta, Oklahoma, as a memorial for a chaser or a spotter or something like that, that's how that was done. Peek behind the curtain. People didn't actually drive to those spots. They just.
I thought there was a little spotter at each one of those locations.
So that won't be a thing anymore, sadly. But a few people ruin it for everybody. But that feature's been removed, so you can no longer move your location. So I and the other Weather Service representatives and really everybody on the board thought it was very important to make sure we have the confidence of Weather Service offices and everybody in those spotter network reports that we remove that potential for problems. So I got to give kudos to John Wetter, and he's the president of Spotter Network, and everybody involved. There's a whole team of people. So so things are better now than they were on April 16th.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, and that's helpful information, Rick. It seems like a good quick response was in order there, and seems to have worked out well. Now, we talked about a lot of things last week. One of those, was impact-based warnings, and the Weather Service's tags that are there, and lots of debate about whether those are helpful or are kind of hurting. I'd love to hear some input from the various members, especially the operational meteorologists and Kim, the social scientists in the group, about where we are with impact-based warnings after all this time. And I know James wants to get to tornado emergencies, and we're definitely going to talk about that in a moment. But starting out here, kind of who wants to chime in first with sort of the state of the union in regards to impact-based warnings? Troy, you're muted if you're talking.
I guess what I worry, and thank you, Stephen, for being here. And of course, Kevin, thanks for being here with us as well. When it comes down to it, I have some concerns all around in different particular areas, but I would just kind of, I guess earlier back in the weekend, I sat there and looked, okay, here we have a tornado warning. Okay, now we've got a tornado warning that can be a regular tornado warning, or it can be a PDS tornado warning, or it can be a tornado warning emergency. And then we've got 3 different tags that go along with that. And then we have, the different offices that are there that can make some minor changes even in how they do that. And I know the big thing has always been in the Weather Service to have some degree of consistency or continuity and so forth. And I just see the 3 types of tornado warnings and 3 different tags. It just gets really messy. Stephen, does that make any sense to you to some degree?
I can appreciate that perspective, and it is something that we are exploring within the agency. It's always every type of warning that we have out there, we're exploring in the context of social science. We're trying to figure out what we can do to convey the best information possible. I believe Rick covered it quite well on Twitter when it came to what is a tornado emergency, and so I'm not going to tread old ground in that arena. But when it comes to severe weather and tornado warnings in general, the focus has been, are we getting the desired action out of the public in order to seek shelter wherever that may be, or to find shelter elsewhere, especially if you're in a mobile home area or in an area where you might actually have to spend some time to be able to evacuate yourself out of a location because you're in a mobile home park. So these are questions that we are currently exploring within the agency and across our partner line offices with the Office of Atmospheric Research.
Well, so, I'm not, I got to give y'all credit, the National Weather Service, because, looking at the social science and what Kim talks to us about, I thought this is going to be great, but now, and Stephen very well points it out, you've got to get into the brain of the person at home that, by the way, is not a meteorologist, and you have to make them critically think about what action they're going to take to protect themselves. And I worry if it gets too confusing that people throw their hands up to some degree. So I credit the Weather Service. I think we've looked, and I think so wisely you've gotten involved with the social science and had people like experts like Kim come in and do this. But I just wonder if it's still, it's still gotten too confusing to some degree. And I'd be interested in hearing from Kevin as well on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Troy, just to clear it up, there's, in my mind at least, the way we sit down and do it, there's 4 levels. Okay, we start with radar confirmed. You hope you start with radar confirmed, right? You're not jumping right to observed. You hope so, right? So you're going to start with radar confirmed. And then how do you handle the fact now that you have dual pole and you're able to observe these tornadoes? So now we've got this new tag that we can flip to, which is observed. From there, I think that's where the contention starts to, and the inconsistencies start to come out. So from there, you go from observed to considerable. Okay, how do you make that transition from observed to considerable?
And Kevin, that's CC, right? I mean, that's looking at the debris signature, right?
When you make that jump or the observed jump? When you make the observed jump, it's CC.
Okay.
And then, so we already know we have an observed tornado. So how to make that jump from observed to considerable, and then you have catastrophic, which is the automatic tornado emergency. So throughout my lifetime here, there's been plenty of times when we've gone from along that contingency or that spectrum. Okay. I think what would help us the most is and I've been saying this since Vortex Southeast and Perils started, I want to take a step back, and I really, no offense to the physical scientists, I know the issues that we have with the atmosphere, and there are some issues to be worked out. There's no doubt about it. But on the social science side, we've really not been able to answer the questions that I want to have answered. And that is, who's seeing these tags? Okay, how important is this information? Does it even matter that I sit down and change it from observed to considerable? Now, I know in the television land, it takes on a new meaning. Just heck, the CC has brought on all kind of challenges for television meteorologists. How do you describe this? I think it's helped because you can actually say, hey, folks, that language that James and his counterparts are able to say, hey, folks, we actually have a confirmed tornado on the ground. Those words have meaning and help people to take action. But what about the other half of the population that doesn't pay attention to weather? Are they listening to weather radio all the way to the end of the message to get the tag? I'm trying to put it all together in my head. If we're laying this at the doorstep of the Weather Service to try to fix, when it may not matter if we fix anything. I think we can fix a tornado warning, false alarm problems. I think we can fix POD lead time problems. I think those are basic issues that we can fix through science and through some ingenuity. But can we fix the other side, the outside? It's almost like we need a WCM here, Rick, that can explain to us, okay, what happens when it hits it is, because we can't really control that. Our people, we have a hard enough time getting weather radios in homes. And we fight with people like the manufactured mobile home community manufacturers who don't even want to acknowledge this problem exists. Are they actually getting the message that they need? The fatality that we've had here this spring down in Hale County, Sawyerville, same exact situation. The warnings couldn't be any better. The tags said considerable. Probably half an hour before it got there. Maybe not that long, but it was enough time to take action. And we still had a fatality from, guess what, a mobile home. And there were 4 people in that mobile home. I didn't talk to them. They probably had no idea it was coming, because my guess is if they had an idea, they would have done the right thing, because people know what to do in this state by now. It's just a matter of them paying attention. So are we really, Stephen, Troy, Kim, Rick, are we really spinning our wheels trying to fix something on our end that we can't really fix?
And before everybody else responds, let me just say something. I have never used one of those tags on the air. Never. To my recollection, I have never used considerable, catastrophic. I just don't. I don't even know what the tags are, because I'm on that green wall and I see the little quick Weather Service chat message, and that's what I see. Everything else, it's just my knowledge of the situation. I'm looking at these live streams and everything else. So I don't even use that on the air, to echo Kevin's point, which is interesting. So,
well, Kevin, is that actually on weather radio? Is that tag on weather radio? I didn't know if it was or not.
I'll be honest with you. I'm sure it is. I don't know how it reads out, but I'm sure it is there. But it's all the way at the end of the message. So you're going to have to sit there for a minute and a half to go through all the cities list and everything else to get to it in the first place. Unless it's a tornado emergency. Now that gets in the headline.
Right.
And I think there was some misconceptions last week. We can get into the tornado emergencies a little bit more in detail if you want to. But it's the tornado emergency. You actually have to physically go in there and type in the locations. Like I think at least the way the software is defaulted, you have to actually go in and do a location. You can't just, it's not like a regular warning. You have to physically do it. So I've issued 2 over the past 2 years, and one was a flash flood one for Pelham up here, and the other one was the Greystone Lee Branch 280 corridor. When we upgraded, I upgraded when it got halfway across Shelby County, and I had to physically go in there and pick out locations I thought it was going to hit, like Lee Branch and 280. I think I put in one of them, I put 119, and I'm trying to guess at sort of where these locations, but I'm very familiar because I live in that area, so I'm very familiar with those areas, and other places I may not be as familiar. If I've got to issue one for Hale County, like we just talked about Sawyerville, I may get Sawyerville, but as it gets to a place where I'm more familiar with, I'm able to do a little bit better job nitpicking where that needs to go. And I guess we can talk about that too.
Yeah, Kevin, that Pat Spoden was on a few weeks ago talking about their December outbreak, and he talked about, and seen on the 60 Minutes interview where he was struggling how to spell Mayfield, in that moment, because you do have to type in what the tornado emergency is for. Most of the other warnings are formatted. You don't have to, they're hands off pretty much if you want them to be. But I want to go back just a couple of steps back. You talked about, fixing the warning system or fixing the tags. And I think it's important to kind of step back and ask the question, well, does it, how do we know it needs to be fixed? I think that's one of the huge issues is we just don't know. And you mentioned it. We just don't know who's using it. Is anybody using it? Does anybody care if we put, a monster tag in there? I mean, does anybody even see that? And I know Kim mentioned in the chat some evaluations about the impact-based warnings. And Kim, I don't know if that's internal or external, but does that shed any light on any of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a question. There's a lot to say about it. The conversation about impact-based warnings, there's sort of the dimension where you're trying to say how confident you are that a tornado exists and is it likely to continue. And there's the piece about what impact do you expect it to have. Those are 2 sort of separate dimensions. I think we can look to our partner in the Weather Service, the Storm Prediction Center, and see what their convective outlooks. They faced a very similar challenge, and they're actually talking now about disambiguating their probabilities so that they're not putting together one product that has baked into it both the coverage and the intensity proposition. We're giving both of those in one scale, and it's confusing the message. And they tried to fix it by turning the scale from 3 categories into 5. They're trying to linearize something that's actually multidimensional. And they've realized that that's a very confusing risk communication challenge. And so they're trying something new there. And I think in the warning space, it's worth us thinking about this too. And we're thinking about this in the Facets paradigm in particular, because there are a lot of technologies where we're starting to get better at trying to tell you what the forecast could be for the likelihood of a storm to produce a tornado or to continue to produce a tornado. That's its own layer of information. That's kind of what those tags of observed are giving you now. And this additional question about, do we need the severity piece? Do we need to tell people about what the impact ought to be? That's where a lot of the dispute has been, because that piece is where there's a really solid social science basis for giving people how certain we are that tornado will exist. We have a lot of evidence from the real world and from experimental studies that suggests people will make better decisions when they know that the hazard's more likely. They don't like tornadoes. People are afraid of tornadoes uniformly. You don't have to tell them this is necessarily going to be a specifically bad one for them to be very concerned, at least by and large. They really need to know, will it actually exist? Because especially in Tornado Alley, people know that they're kind of ephemeral phenomenon and that they're also very localized. So that alone, the fact that anyone listens to us at all about tornadoes, let's just not forget, from a decision science perspective, it's almost a miracle because of just how small scale that phenomenon is compared to how big the area is that's warned, even in tornado warnings that verify, putting aside the false alarm ratio and everything else. Let's just celebrate the miracle that is. So we know that we have people on our side. They do not want to be hit by a tornado. They're very motivated. So the social science is very clear. People do not like tornadoes, very feared, very dreaded. Will respond more when given more certainty hazard exists. The severity piece came in after the Joplin tornado. This is really where this was born, as a question of, are people getting the message and doing the things that we want them to do? And I think that, the real challenge with using Joplin as our exemplar case upon which to build perhaps this new kind of paradigm, because it was in that service assessment where they suggested some kind of gradation structure where you increase the, the sort of seriousness of the message to let people know this is something you really need to pay attention to. Joplin was a case where there was a lot going on at a local level in just those couple years before that tornado, a really big spike in the local false alarm ratio for different reasons. It was right after polygon warnings had been instituted. There were a number of things going with local siren policy. It's just a really kind of wonky case upon which to base national policy change. And the recommendation that was made in the service assessment was very broad. You can try to have some sort of gradation here. We could have gone the direction of having more gradation in the certainty, how certain we were that the hazard existed at all. And we kind of went down this impact path, in part because there's this general social science recommendation from risk communication that says people want impacts information, not just hazard. I get that that's a general recommendation that's out there. The thing is, people who are native to Tornado Alley, so maybe there's some issues with immigrant populations who don't know quite what tornadoes are. But for people who are from these areas, they know the impact of a tornado. I think it kind of goes without saying. So I think we kind of overshot a little bit. And there were questions, there were sincere questions after the paradigm was born in the warning program about, well, okay, who does this help? If we try to do it, can we at least help people, and how does this make its way through the communication system? There were 3 separate assessments done, funded by the National Weather Service. I think one was internal, one was done by the Sea Grant program, and another was done by a contract with an external academic researcher and contractor. And what each one revealed was these layers of what James was talking about, that while we're putting energy into putting these tags out, they're not necessarily getting out to people directly. They're, people like James aren't sitting on their, they're not standing there reading out all of the tags as they go. Some of what's going on is a little bit more implicit. Maybe it makes the broadcast meteorologist feel more comfortable breaking into coverage. If there's a tag that has a higher gradation, something like this. I think the question, there's still outstanding questions about if people do get them in the real world, what difference do they make? Do people not care so much for the lower tier ones if they are paying attention to the tags and then notice that a tag is missing in another event? We don't know the answer to this question. And in part, the challenge is physical science kind of put something out into the universe before social science had methods for observing it, and measuring the effect of it. So we were always catching up. From the moment that this thing hit the ground, we were trying to develop ways to observe what the impacts were of this from the very beginning. We're just now to the point at the Severe Storms Lab partnering with the Weather Service, where we are collecting systematic data in any way, shape, or form about how people actually receive information about tornado threats and choose to respond in real events. The dashboard, Stefan, that you mentioned earlier is a survey done of sort of idealized conditions with people sitting in front of a computer saying, what do you think you do when you're last a tornado event? What do you think you did? And what do you think you'd do under these different conditions? And we know in the social sciences, people can do very different things when they're actually under conditions of risk and uncertainty than what they think they might do when they're sitting there in a cool head, cool seat, not subject to the constraints of time, all of those things. So I'm sorry, I know this has been a little long-winded, but I'm fascinated by this conversation because it's actually kind of a thorny question. I know we want to bring the social science to bear. I know Kevin is frustrated with people like me and my ilk for not having the answers. And in part, as he shakes his head, I know it's got to be frustrating though, because it's your thing you live with day after day. And the question you asked is such a personal and good question. What could we have done for that individual who perished? And as I said after the December 10th events, and I'm going to say it again, something else the social sciences are going to point to is there is some irreducible amount of vulnerability in our communities, where, especially in our country, where we prize individualism and the ability for individuals to make their own choices. And I think that value has come through in the National Weather Service, where we're here to inform decisions and not control them. When that is the case, there will be times where the hazard overtakes some people, and you won't know for sure if it's because of a failure of the communication system or if it was an individual choice, until we get better at observing how people are receiving information and making decisions on the ground. What we need to be doing in the social sciences, I think, is doing more of what you guys do when severe weather happens. We need to observe people like you observe the atmosphere, so we can really get at that question. And in the meantime, having this discussion, I think what I suggest for our field is to do what we feel we can do with the highest scientific quality and the most consistency, and just know that there isn't necessarily a perfect that we have to offer yet on the social science side for this question on gradation of impact severity, and the severity of impacts. And I know there'll be a great conversation we can have about tornado emergencies and how those are defined separate from this. But I did want to just throw that into the ether. I see there's been a lot of discussion over in chat, so we'll toss it back to Bill.
Well, listen, I want to be let me be very clear. I'm not frustrated with you or social scientists at all. And I'm gonna be very clear here. I always get a nasty letter every time I'm on this show. And here it comes. You ready? Okay. What I'm frustrated is, I think the best thing the Weather Service did after 2011 was introduce social science to what we do for a living, because it had to be done. It never, had been done before. It needed to be done. The frustration comes in as we continue to forge ahead without their recommendations, or without waiting and being patient enough to see what we need to be doing. And that's exactly what I was getting at, is I don't want to continue evolving this program without having this clear information in our hands. I don't want to keep on pushing forward where you guys always are trying to catch up to what we're doing. And I want to make sure what we're doing makes sense, because we're at a point now. Let's stay where we are. Everybody's trained up and ready to go. And let's wait and let you guys catch up to whether it's Facets is the next thing around the corner, or even getting more information on whether these tags are really worth the effort. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get these tags and get these tags right. For what? It's hard enough to make the decision.
I'll tell you for what, Kevin, because I get to be the incident meteorologist for 34 hotels, and it tells me a lot. I can't be watching 3 channels like I was Saturday night in Oklahoma with, David Payne and Damon Lane and Mike Morgan all at the same time. And their information is fabulous. The screens with the helicopters and the chasers, and they're interpreting the radar in real time. I know James says he doesn't use tags because he doesn't have to, because he sees that radar data and can interpret it well. It helps me a lot in communicating to a hotel general manager why this incident tonight didn't happen when you had to pull 82 guests down and stick them in the tornado shelter, as opposed to December 10th, where 3 of my general managers nearly lost their lives that night. And that morning, the warnings were dire, the outlooks were dire, then it came around full circle a couple of weeks ago when tornadoes revisited Western Kentucky, because they perceived their local meteorologists to be telling them that it was the same event again, and it was nowhere near what it looked like December 10th. It was a serious potential event. And I think I was able to help calm their nerves, because you can, I go back to a day when my mother was hanging out the back of my aunt's mobile home trailer while my aunt was at the other side, and they were watching the clouds, because you did not have any information to go by other than looking at the sky. In Marion County, Alabama, there was no weather radio, there was no James Spann, there barely was AM radio. And I think in some ways
we've advanced a lot in the last 50 years on this. I'm not saying we haven't,
but maybe our people.
I'm glad to provide the tags. Let me give you a perfect example of a tag I'm talking about. That's this severe thunderstorm warning with a tornado possible. Now, what are you
That's the
supposed to do
fifth
with
element. That's the fifth element.
that? Yeah, what are you supposed to
That's
do
right.
with that? If you're the end user,
Well, I'll
and you're
tell you what
sitting
I
at
did
home,
with it. There was a warning for Duncan, Oklahoma. Saturday night, Rick was probably working that event. And I took the time, to make sure that that general manager understood that, this was a severe thunderstorm warning, but that it could become tornadic at any second. So it warranted watching it a lot more closely. Than just, and I was doing that really closely with the radar data, keeping them informed, but I needed them to know that this was not just, a run of the mill severe thunderstorm warning, which is important in its own way. But it gave me confidence to actually reach out to them and say, hey, this is a severe thunderstorm warning, but the Weather Service thinks enough of it to put the tornado possible tag on it. Our people know what that means. Okay, good. Thanks for that information. And I find it helpful and useful. I think our discussion tonight is fabulous. But for me personally, as a tornado incident meteorologist, that's what I get to do, and it does help me.
okay, look, that helps. I like to know this information. I wish I knew this across the board from a lot of people because this helps. But
it seems like the emergency managers like it a lot too, don't they, Kevin? Do you get that feedback from your EMs and in the Birmingham CWA?
We don't issue it a lot here. We did the other night. It's April 15th, 14th. I'm starting to lose track. I think it was April 4th when we had the true QLCS. We rarely have a true QLCS here, but I think, are we going to sit here and try to whack all these moles that are coming through, or are we going to do something else? I don't know. I mean, I don't have a good answer for you because when you go out and survey the next day, you can clearly see evidence of where there was tornadoes versus the straight line winds, because in Alabama and Southeast in general, we don't get a lot of straight line wind damage. It happens. It's very rare when we get, the 60 plus straight line winds. But where those little spin ups happen, there is a concentrated place where I think people do need to take some kind of action. And look, we're all sitting here. We all been in this business a long time. We know people don't take severe thunderstorm warnings, but we know most people don't take any action for those. So we have to step up to the next level. So to go back to your original question, Troy, does it matter, maybe the real tier here that we're talking about, severe thunderstorm warnings versus tornado warnings. Is that the real tier jump here that we're talking about? Is that when people actually take action? Because there's different tiers for severe thunderstorm warnings too. I mean, there's a big difference between quarter-size hail and 4-inch hail, believe me.
I know Rick wants to jump in, but I wanted to say hello to Bruce Jones, who's joined us from Midland Weather
Bruce.
Radio, sponsor of the show. And one question came up a moment ago that you can answer before we go back to Rick and Troy. Bruce, do the tags get read out on the warnings on the weather radio?
That's a very good question. I'll have to listen closely, but I don't recall hearing any tags on there. I can say as a broadcast meteorologist, when you're on TV and you've got 4 or 5 supercells on there, it's a little bit helpful to know which ones you really need to focus on and which ones maybe you can, give secondary status to. So I'll just throw that out there.
The interesting thing that Kevin pointed out, and it's true, is that if you want to hear that tag, you have to do it 2.5 minutes into that warning because you've got to wait to the very end. But Kevin, you remember back when we had our SVR for 3/4 inch hail, and everything was pulled back and we looked at it and we said there are too many severe thunderstorm warnings. So we're going to go up to 1 inch on the hail and begin to cut that back. I'd be willing to say we issue more SVRs today than we ever have. So I wonder if I don't know if that made that much difference or not. At least I know it did initially, I believe, but I'm not sure it does now.
It didn't make any difference on the number of warnings, and it didn't make any difference on the performance either. So the performance stayed the same. I think you didn't come to Mississippi State this year. You missed my talk when we talked about the different technology changes we've made throughout the year, and it's basically remained a flat line all these years. I think there was the big difference that changed in numbers when we went to polygon warnings. The numbers did go down after that. So they were around 40,000. They dropped to about 30,000 or 32,000. I think we average or something now. So they did drop about 8,000 with polygon warnings. But that's about the
Kevin,
only change.
explain the numbers you're talking about for people that didn't hear your talk. How many warnings are issued every year? It was a great talk.
Yeah, I mean, we issue about 35 to 40,000. And the interesting thing to me is the people who actually issue those warnings, the operational meteorologists, have no idea how big that number really is. When I ask them, it's usually around 1,000, 5,000. It's nowhere close to that number that we actually issue. And what my point I was trying to drive home is that we were trying to fix the problem. We were trying to fix the problem with technology jumps, and the polygon warnings have done the best, but changing the criteria for severe weather or for severe hail didn't make a difference. Dual pole hasn't made a difference either, believe it or not. So nothing has really made a difference in the sheer number, the volume of warnings, and nothing especially has made a difference in the statistical changes, because I think, what did I go all the way back to, like 98 or 2000, something like that? And it's basically a flat line. The FAR and the POD is basically a flat line from 2000 to today, and it hasn't really changed at all.
I want to jump back a little bit to the James. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we've all got work to do, and that's the point of this. It's not to criticize anybody, but let's all work together to make it better. That's what we're trying to do here. So go ahead, Rick.
Just going back to the tornado possible. I mean, we're one of the offices that uses it judiciously. I don't think it's not a CYA thing to say, well, there could be a tornado, so we're going to put it on every warning. We're not doing that, but we use it very judiciously. I think one of the things, just like with everything else in the Weather Service, every office that's using it probably has different reasons for doing it. Some use it as a step toward a tornado warning, like, well, we're probably going to tornado warn this storm, but we're not quite ready, so let's just stair step up to it. We use it mainly for QLCS things, or it's like, if we identify a potential feature in a line of storms, not the whole line, but a potential feature within a line, that would be a precursor to a QLCS tornado. We'll do it. We may use the tornado possible, or we may issue a tornado warning for that one and use tornado possible for a broader part of the line. So we use it. And I think it's mainly, I mean, I know the EMs kind of lean forward a little bit when they see it. Maybe, we've heard comments from them that they were paying a little bit more attention because they had seen that. So it kind of gave them a head start or a heads up. And the TV Mets use it too. I mean, here they read it on the air. The Weather Service is now saying tornado possible. So we hear all them using that. So it helps. And Kim mentioned too, it helps maybe increase their confidence, or do I need to do a cut in or not? It's just a severe thunderstorm warning, but should I cut in and interrupt the last 5 minutes of Wheel of Fortune or whatever and get angry, hate mail and death threats and things like that. But so I think there's some value. I think there's some value in that. So I know we need to get on tornado emergencies here eventually, but tornado possible, it's not perfect. And I do see, if I'd gone to Pauls Valley, Oklahoma today, and I don't even know if we had it in the warning, but if I'd gone to Pauls Valley today and the people that were awakened at 2:00 in the morning by this 100-mile-an-hour wind or tornado or whatever it was, and I told them, well, there was a tornado possible in the severe thunderstorm warning, I would never tell them that, because they don't know what that is, and they would never get it. They're not getting a siren or something for that. So I know it's not directly benefiting the public like that, but I think it is benefiting them in other ways.
And let me just say too, there's something that we have to do in our business that are practitioners that are talking with people. And I've said it before, we're not that good. If a tornado's down for 1 minute, you can't issue a warning for that. I don't care who you are. You can be the greatest academic, pinhead, knowledgeable weather god of the universe, and you can't do that. You physically can't warn people for a tornado that's down for 60 seconds. We have to be better at communicating that risk to people within that QLCS. This could easily happen, but we're not that good. And you got to really pay attention. You've got to pay attention. Part of it is on you. So we have to be better at that. And I will say too, there are rare times where I will say on television tonight, if you are under a severe thunderstorm warning, you need to do what you would normally do for a tornado warning. That's the kind of stuff people can understand, because like what Kevin says, nobody does anything for a severe thunderstorm warning. They don't do anything. And so we've got to be better at communicating the end game to people. So I've got
a question for Stephen and for Kevin both. And this is sort of a pet peeve of mine. And we talk about how we word this, and Kim talks about how we word these warnings. And does the public ever see the text of a tornado warning? Not really, except through the crawls that will show up on the bottom of TV screens. But to the asterisk number 3, back in a revision of Warn Gen a while back, we had something pretty much nationwide we were using that said National Weather Service meteorologists are detecting a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado. And then a new version of Warn Gen, and that was gone. And now we're to a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado. Do you think a warning like that might make a difference when people see it crawled, when they know that the professional at the National Weather Service is preparing that warning? I've always wondered, Stefan, why the National Weather Service doesn't give their people the credit for putting these tornado warnings out. And I'm wondering whether it would make a difference to people to know. You know, it's the same thing with storm reports. If you hear the Austin police have got 2-inch hail somewhere, that report means more to people. And I would tend to think National Weather Service meteorologists telling me actually that wording in the warning would mean more.
Yeah, that would be a subject matter that I would tend to toss over to my colleague Greg Shore, who runs a severe weather program in the Weather Service. He is very knowledgeable about these things and explores these very questions that you're talking about. I think another question that we always are considering, and I think Kim brought it up, is how do people respond if you give them a probability of something? I think the project that was called The Probability of What, because there was always something there about how people respond to different types of probabilities, what their thresholds are. I mean, if you have a probability that there's a 20% chance that a tornado is going to run through your area, such as with Fee, like Kim was talking about, is that an acceptable risk to you? Or do you immediately start thinking of taking action? So if you're a nursing home with a lot of people that need time to evacuate, that 20% threshold might mean something to you. Versus for somebody else who's just standing out there, probably listening to the sirens outside go off. I mean, we all know that happens. They may not do anything. And it's just a different threshold and a different way of thinking. And that I think is actually being actively explored is what do we do with the probabilistic hazard information? I mean, it was something that was released in 2014 from the National Severe Storms Lab as a potential replacement for Warn Gen. That was towards the beginning of my time in the Weather Service. I remember hearing it back then. And it's actually something that we are actively exploring. In fact, we have one office right now that's currently exploring it as we speak. So there's hope there. But I think where we stand right now is you're at the cusp of where social and physical sciences are starting to marry up. And it's completely new. It's new for us as meteorologists because for the most part, we have been so focused on the physical science that we really didn't give a lot of thought to how people would react to certain words or information that we send out there. And for the social scientists, you're being like Kim, she's being pulled into the arena of this is how meteorologists think. And that's a whole other arena in and of itself, is how meteorologists come to a decision to issue that warning and which threshold of the warning to go. I know you and I were chatting about it quite a bit in the chat.
Sorry, you're breaking up just a little bit at the end there, but I'll pick up that thread about the probability piece and how interesting it is, the conversation that you guys are having about tags and the functions that they have. You're talking about core partners like emergency managers and broadcasters of different kinds having the ability to make the kinds of decisions they need to make because they get this additional cue, and it helps them to be more confident in, okay, it's actually worth me taking these steps or making, advising my partners in these different ways. We actually see things exactly like this when we're working in the hazardous weather test bed with probabilistic hazard information. And, we bring in partners like broadcasters and emergency managers. And Troy has been there, is one of our participants in that experiment. And that was exactly what happened. And the wonderful thing about it was they were able to decide, what the gradation of threat was for their own community. So they could look at that probability level and the amount of time that they had, and then say, you know what, here's my situation. Here are the events I have going on. Here are my exposures. Here are my population characteristics. And I can make the calls that I need to make for these places and use my judgment. And what happens then is we take the forecaster out of this seat where they feel like they have to make one call for everyone in their whole area to make everything work for everybody. And that's a lot of pressure to put on one organization's shoulders, one individual's shoulders. And we transform the alerting space into one where there are a lot of actors who have responsibilities. And that includes the public, the publics who are looking at this, and they can receive that information as well and know how much time they need to do various kinds of response activities and what their thresholds look like. They can make those calls, just like you said. So I see a lot of what you're talking about with the tags as maybe a temporary holdover until a point where maybe we can get to offering some of these technologies more explicitly and get those through the system. Because the good things you guys are talking about that do happen with the tags are exactly what we're seeing in those testbed environments. And that's really, really heartening. It's that plus just, you don't have to then sweat the warning doing all the work. Right now, the warning is the only thing that does any of this work. And there's so many people who have to make so many different kinds of decisions. It's so multifaceted. So it's just a lot of pressure to put on you to make something singularly perfect. I'm comfortable living with the reality that it's not going to be singularly perfect as it is now. We're just in this tension spot. But that I think there's a bright, light that you can look toward for where the future is going with all of this.
So before we get out the torches and pitchforks out here in the parking lot, people want to talk about this tornado emergency, issue. And everybody on the show needs to again chime in. We briefly hit on it last week, but now that Kim is here, Kevin is here, Stefan is here. Do we need a tornado emergency? Are they hurting the process? Are people not doing anything for a regular tornado warning, but now they're waiting for a tornado emergency? Yay or nay? Do we need to have these things anymore? And I would love to hear. Stefan, we'll start with you, and then let's go to Kevin, because I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
Well, when you're talking about a tornado emergency, it's implicit that there's probably a meteorologist issuing the warning because there's 100% chance that there's a rather large tornado on the ground at that location. And I think that is where we are sitting, is that we're sitting in that bridge right now between what we have been starting with, which was you have these warnings where it was just severe and tornado, and now you have multiple levels of warnings, whether they be severe or tornado now, to what could potentially be in the future with probabilistic hazard information, where somebody is sitting there under a 100% chance of a tornado and this thing means business. That is where we're going to be looking towards the future. And this is the next evolution for Facets, is taking the next step in the warning process. So that's where I sit in this arena.
All right, Kevin, go.
I guess, when we go back to what happened to a couple weeks back, what concerns me is I never, as a warning meteorologist out there, I never want to have my hands tied. I want to have every tool in my tool bag, and I don't want anybody ever telling me, here are your rules now for issuing a tornado emergency. I always want to have that very open-ended, because weather is open-ended. You can't put rules to weather. If you do, you get burned. So let's roll back the clock to March 25th, 2020. That was the day when we had two separate tornado emergencies. We had the one that came up through Centerville, Brent. You saw the TDS associated with it. The thing was
20. I'm sorry, Kevin, 2021, right? Instead of 2020.
2021. I'm sorry, you're right.
Right.
And
okay.
We had the Brent Centerville tornado, the one that had the large TDS, very wide, very destructive. Ends up not hitting a lot, missing Centerville just barely to the south. Would have done catastrophic damage had it gone through town. If you don't believe me, go half a mile south of the Sawmill restaurant and look at that huge wide path that it cut across Highway 25 there. But then you have the other end, and that was not my storm. I didn't issue on that one, but I was on the Pelham and 280 storm. Now the question is, did that one need a tornado emergency? You don't know what you don't know sitting at the radar scope. Okay, it goes into this sort of cone of silence area just north of our radar here. The radar signature doesn't look good anymore. It looked very similar to what you might imagine Little Rock had to deal with in Memphis the other week. But we've got Pelham and Helena Police and Fire Department responding to multiple entrapments, multiple buildings destroyed, multiple damage. And now I've got this entity that I can't even really see anymore. I'm not getting good reports in real time necessarily because it's so chaotic by this time. But I've got it headed toward 280, Lee Branch, 119, going up the side of Oak Mountain. I mean, there's a lot of people who live in that area. You ever see 280 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? I mean, it is wall to wall traffic. And so what do I do with that information? I mean, if I'm sitting there, I decided to roll the dice. Okay, this may be an EF0. It may be nothing at this point because I can't really see anymore, but I know where it's headed. I know its history. It's been on the ground for 2 counties. And thankfully, I guess, unfortunately for the people who were underneath it, but that video finally came in from that, I think it was the 119 traffic cam there at Walgreens, and it showed a picture of it. By then it was too late. I'd already issued it, but it still had, what I would consider to be a very, dire situation for the people who lived in the Eagle Point neighborhood. You ask them if it was an emergency, it was an emergency for people who lived in Eagle Point and the people on 280. But the thing that amazed me about it, somehow, some way, because there was a chaser who was sitting at the Zaxby's there at Lee Branch, and he pulls out on the 280. He's going eastbound, and there's not a soul out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Can you explain why there wasn't a single car out there? Something must have happened that triggered people to not be driving on that road. And I was worried to death that somebody's going to get picked up on that road, and that's where the fatalities are going to be, on that road right there, because it's such a busy area in Shelby and Jefferson County. And there was nobody out there, nobody. So I don't know if the emergency paid off for that situation. I don't know if anybody took action. We didn't have a single fatality with that. We did later on down in Ohatchee later on, but we didn't have a single fatality. I don't think we really had any injuries from a really hard-hitting tornado. I wouldn't call it violent. It wasn't F4. We didn't quite get to that level, but it was certainly a solid F3. So does that deserve an emergency? I don't know.
And let me just say as a disclaimer, that hit my house. I mean, it was an emergency to me too. But let me, and again, and I want to talk about false alarms. There's so much we need to talk about here. But real quick, Kevin. So we had loss of life in Ohatchee. Was that a tornado emergency or not?
That was not a tornado emergency. That was what I scaled that one back to the, I think, considerable tag. But again, that was not, by that point, there was a separate tornado had lifted, had recycled, and gone into Ohatchee. Now, what was my decision on that? Because it was still my storm. We decided to go considerable, probably because by that point I was getting information that the damage was not to the F4. I mean, I like to reserve the tornado emergency, if possible, to signatures that we think are going to reach violent range, F4, F5, if we can. In real time, it's hard to do that, right? It's hard to diagnose that. But it was not a tornado emergency for Ohatchee.
So what if somebody in Ohatchee's thinking, okay, this isn't a tornado emergency, so I don't need to do anything. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm just saying I'm hearing more and more of that mindset creeping in when I go to Dollar Generals and Walmarts where real people are. And I just, that's the whole question we're talking about here. So that's great that you went through that. So let me just open it up here for everybody else, because everybody's got an opinion on it. Kim, you're our social scientist. Talk to us. Help us. Help me.
James knows that I always love that. help us in that, some of these are questions that, like I sort of suggested before, we're still investigating in different ways. I think the social science in opinion on this case is guided a bit by concern for equity and what is an emergency. You're revolving yourself around this question beautifully, because to anyone who's hit by a tornado, it is an emergency for them. This is one of the biggest challenges with an impact-based forecast of any kind, actually, is who are you caring about the impact being to? Who's at the table who gets to decide what those impacts look like? What is it that you're counting? And that is a challenge that faces us in the severe weather domain that we're trying to apply this in. It faces the forecasters who are trying to do this in winter weather. Impacts are extraordinarily subjective. And I think, the tornado emergency piece, it was born out of this very clear-cut case in Oklahoma in May 3rd, 1999, where that tornado was down. I think at the time it was down by Anadarko, and the forecasters were sitting there thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is going to come into the metro. We have to do something extraordinary to convey to people this is going to be a bad situation." Again, I look to what is it that tornado emergencies have been shown to do really well. When you do the verification exercise, what they've done really well is shown us cases where tornadoes are much more likely to exist. The false alarm ratio is very low for tornado emergencies. This goes back to, I think, the essential argument of we have times where we are really pretty good at telling you when tornadoes are more likely to exist than other times. That's a probability proposition. Not necessarily an impact proposition. So the other piece of this where we're looking at is, do we have to tie this to a population? And I guess you guys talked about this some last week, that there's a difference in guidance on this. One set of guidance in the directive and one that's kind of emerged from WDTD on how population should be treated and considered. There's an equity proposition in this for the social sciences. We look at this, and I know a number of my colleagues have looked at that and said, why can't rural populations matter and their lives and their concerns and their livelihoods matter? Are we creating something that is an urban service product? And that is a really challenging question. And I really, I really appreciate that right now in the weather service, service equity is a really big conversation piece. And I would suggest that if people can try to think of this in the frame of service equity, that we should, and think about what that population layer, should look like. I think sometimes we gravitate toward population as a way to produce impact because it's the easiest thing to map in GIS. It's something that we have at our fingertips. We can put the hazard layer with this population layer. We can count more people and say, yeah, this could be a more, the sort of critical incident that could arise from this could be, could be stronger that way. And I know some emergency management officials can use that information helpfully. But again, is this something that needs to go to the public, or are we just making something that should actually be a product for emergency management partners that doesn't need to go out to everybody else? I have those strong questions and reservations, and I know a number of social scientists do too.
Hey, and I may be part of the problem, because that very day is a great example of that, because I made the decision to issue a tornado emergency in one instance based on the fact that it was going through a very populated area. Later that night, I made the decision to issue it based on the radar signature and the science behind it, and not necessarily population. So on the same day, two different decisions for two different reasons. And then go back to 2019 in March 3rd, Beauregard, that's not a big major metro area. You can't tell me that wasn't a tornado emergency if I've ever seen one. So again, I think there's some kind of continuum there that we always, human beings are involved, right? You want the human to sit there and think these things out and not ever rely on a computer to help you with that. You want a human being thinking about, well, in this case, the radar signature is not as good, but the results could be catastrophic because of the population base. In this case, the population is not as high, but based on the radar signature, if even one person lives there, they're in deep trouble. So it's like you want to have that interaction in your head, and you want to have that thought process play out. Stephan, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, Kevin, and I think you made a point earlier that I thought was rather interesting, and Kim added on to it. Our ability to detect these EF2 3+ tornadoes is quite strong. In fact, whether you put a considerable tag, a catastrophic tag, call it an emergency, we're doing a pretty darn good job in detecting these tornadoes at that high end. And usually the more difficult ones that I've been seeing so far, I've been hearing about, has been on the margins, where on those EF0s, the EF1 tornadoes, QLCS tornadoes, where things spin up and spin down extremely rapidly. So I think the question is an interesting one, if only because we're approaching it now from a social science aspect. we're doing a really good job in detecting these higher end tornadoes. And our agency definitely has the statistics to help back that up, in the fact that we are definitely hitting these higher end tornadoes quite well. In fact, Kim said, when it comes to these emergencies, our probability of detection is extremely high, a false alarm rate is extremely low. And that's a very good message. At least we know we're detecting these very large tornadoes, and those that are quite easily distinguishable well. It's just the more difficult cases where we are still working hard to try to figure out what we can do to improve.
Stefan, but I got a question then, and understand what you're saying, but is it the high false alarm ratio for the EF zeros, ones, and twos that are hurting us there? I guess it's a question that James and I ask sometimes. Are there too many tornado warnings? You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I think what it comes down to is we're still learning a lot about what leads to the QLCS tornadoes. I've had to issue a few warnings for those things, and they're not easy. I mean, usually you may get a scan or two to see it, and then it's gone. And oftentimes you're not going to have a lot of lead time for it. And that's where this point where Rick was mentioning earlier coming in, where you do detect, put in a tornado possible tag along the line and then issue the tornado warning where you are more certain of it. That's where we're coming into play. So, I mean, usually EF zeros are not the fatal type tornadoes. In fact, I think I think we've only had 4 maybe in the last 15 years. So usually the lower end tornadoes, they do cause damage. But when it comes to the more fatal, capable of causing injury type tornadoes, I think we're doing a pretty good job in that arena of detecting them and alerting for them. And it's just a matter of, well, what do we call it? What do we put a tag onto it? Catastrophic, considerable, emergency, whatever the case may be. We should take heart in the fact that we're doing a pretty darn good job in detecting these things.
But is the false alarm ratio too high?
Yeah.
Right now? Because against a Kim question, I guess, but I go to the Dollar Generals and Walmarts. That's where people are. We're not serving us on this show. We're not serving the people that listen to this show. They're weather dweebs. That they are, they're into this. We're serving people that live in Gordo, Alabama, and people that live in Millport, Alabama. And I go in there and talk with those people, and I hear this over and over. I hear those warnings, but I used to. Now, let me just say this. I don't hear it much more. Why? Because of what Kevin's done down there. I mean, this guy is a one-man band in reducing the false alarm ratio and keeping the POD high. But it's my opinion, and it varies from office to office. Every office is different. I mean, some offices, the FAR is 80 plus. And then some it's in the 30s. And I don't know, Kevin, talk to me. Help me out.
Well, first of all, I'm not a one-man band. It took a team effort here to make this happen. I mean, I can't do this alone. I can't be at every severe weather event. I can't issue every warning. And there's a good structure that I think we've set up here that I think every weather service office should look at the way we do business here. They should look at it because we treat it, like a sports team, when the same people work radar, the same people communicate, the same people work social media, the same people coordinate these events over and over again, you get very good at your trade over time. And instead of trying to just throw anybody into the seat, and that's the way we used to do business. And you're right, the events that we were horrible at were the marginals, the slights, and that's where you'd see October 30th, 2010 comes to mind, where we issued 30 warnings for one event, and we had 2 tornadoes, and we missed both tornadoes. So the POD for that event was 0, and the false alarm rate was 100, and we were sitting on 30 warnings. And that's the event when I woke up and I said, okay, we've got to stop this, because this is when you were going to these places and hearing the issues. Now, what's strange to me about it is the further that we go down this path, we are fairly conservative. We don't carpet bomb tornado warnings like we used to. But now the pendulum has swung the other way. And now I'm hearing from people that we're too conservative. We don't issue enough now. I was like, am I in the twilight zone?
Let's clarify that, Kevin. That those are people in the weather enterprise, not the public, right? Those are weather people, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the weather enterprise people who, and there's some even in this own office. So it doesn't just, not outsiders looking in. No matter the success we've had, there's still people who disagree with what we're doing. So it doesn't matter. That it's just odd to me because I never thought in a million years I would ever hear somebody say we need to be issuing more tornado warnings. That just seems strange to me. And it was just it's sort of new. It's about a year old now, and I'm starting to hear it more and more, and it's getting louder and louder. And heaven forbid if we have a miss. If we have a miss in this office, you hear from it now. Oh, we're too conservative. Oh, we're paying the price now for lowering the false alarm rate. Nonsense, because we were missing this stuff before. And people don't remember that. They got really short memories now. Attention spans are 7 seconds. But I've got the data to back it up. So anybody who really wants to have a conversation about it, we can have that conversation because I've run the numbers all the way back to when this office opened. So I know what we've done. And we were missing these before. So don't give me this now. We've missed them before. There's technology gaps. There's issues with missing, and we can get into that if you really want to. But the point is, we're not going to carpet bomb in this office. Those days are over as long as I'm here.
And we got radar issues too, coverage issues, and that's a whole nother story for another day. All right, I'm sorry. Anybody else here chime in? I've talked too much. Kevin and I are going to get in trouble. Boy, it's quiet.
We didn't mean to end the conversation.
No,
we stopped. We just stopped it.
I'll just really.
But Kevin, and I'm sorry, Kim, but
no, you go ahead,
Kevin,
Troy.
But what y'all did is, as I understand it, and I want to make sure people understand this that are listening tonight, is you actually sat back and said, we're going to start looking at all the warnings we issued. When you woke up that next day and you said, okay, we're going to do so, you really critically sat back and looked at that. And that's where I think that'd be good for every weather service office to do. I mean, I'm not up there where I can make those kind of decisions, Stefan and everyone else. I won't pretend that, but that's what you did, right? You critically looked at every warning.
Well, unfortunately, Troy, it took April 27, 2011 to make us do it. I mean, we had to have that wake up call, that wake up moment. And, you know, the MIC who was here, Jim Stefkovich was here at the time. And what it takes is the will to do it. That's what it takes, because it's a hard conversation to have with folks. It's a hard cultural change because you just get so embedded in that culture of the way the Weather Service office should work, the way it should look. And to make that fundamental transformation was not an easy thing, but it was all we, and I told him we had that conversation because I was hired on as the SUE in August of that year. I wasn't the SUE during the event. I was still lead forecaster. And I said, boss, what do you want me to work on? He didn't say he wanted me to work on training plans. He didn't want me to work on anything but fixing this severe weather program. And I said, my statement to him, I'll still remember it. Are you going to get my back when I have to make these tough decisions and have these conversations? I wanted somebody to have my back who was in charge. And that's what it takes right there. And that's what's hard to get around, because you've got to deal with people. You got to be, you've got to have empathy. You've got all kind of people on the spectrum, feelers. You've got science people. You've got thinkers. You've got all kind of things that the social science people can probably fill you in on of the personality types. But if you want to fix the problem, it takes a strong will, and the culture change is very tough, and it takes a long time. It wasn't an overnight fix.
And let me say this too, the broadcasters, we've got their back. It works. What they've done, they cut out so many false alarms. I can't tell you how many times we cut off Wheel of Fortune. We cut off football games. We cut off The Price is Right, cut off Freak of the Week, cut off everything for a tornado warning where there was nothing. And it's like the people are sick of it. Everybody's just sick of the whole thing. And that initiative that Kevin and what they've done here, let me tell you what, it's been a game changer. And I can't tell you how all of us support what they've done here. And I can only hope that there's a concept that just maybe what's done here could spread to other weather service offices around the country, because it has worked. People have noticed it. Warnings mean something now. And it's been such a good thing for us. So I can't applaud Kevin enough for what he's done here.
Well, look, I appreciate it. And the thing that tells me that it's working is the fact that when you guys go on air and you say, if the Birmingham office issues a warning, tornado warning, you better take it serious, because they don't issue them very often anymore. And this means business if it's coming from them. And that, I think, those words sort of get into people, and I go out and I deal, and I'm on storm surveys all the time. I talk to people in the past, and they comment about hearing these things. There's certain phraseology that sort of triggers them to action now, and no, that's one of them that I hear over and over now, and I think that's huge. And that's, remember, we can talk about false alarm PODs, but at the end of the day, we're here to save lives, and that's what we're trying to do. So don't ever lose that.
Right. We're not here to make weather people happy. We're here to save somebody's life. That's what we're here to do. And you know, so I support what they do. So we've got to take a break. But Kim, you were trying to talk here a second ago. So let's let you wrap this up. And then we got to go to Jen's This Week in Tornado History. So Kim, go. Kim's probably mad at us, Kevin.
No, not at all. I was actually, there's so many things that we could talk about we could make the show 10 hours long. I think the only thing that I'll say to that is what's been done in the Birmingham office is really remarkable, and that it's important to remember that there are some environments that are more difficult to forecast for than other environments. So, you know, the southeastern United States warning in a lot of these CWAs is a much tougher call, and you don't get the kinds of clear-cut signatures that you in environments that you get the sort of classic textbook environments that you get in some other areas. So what you're trying to deal with, that balance in your area, is an enormous scientific challenge. So to be able to do what you've done and to keep POD high and reduce FAR, you know, it means that you've really embraced some difficult, thorny science to get that done, and just really, really great success. And in the social science side, it's still an open conversation about just how much false alarms weigh on individuals' minds when different situations come up. There's some dispute about it still. So, you know, I think it's clear, though, the better we can get at discriminating true threatening events from non-events is going to be to the benefit of everybody. So I'm glad that people are having this conversation and these efforts are going forward.
So let's take a quick break. And Tony, by the way, Tony Rice, his voice is struggling today, so we don't have a Tony report, but Jen has a This Week in Tornado History. We're going to come back and talk with Bruce. We'll do picks of the week and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
This week in tornado history, the super outbreak of April 25th through the 28th, 2011. 362 confirmed tornadoes, 4 rated EF5, 12 given a rating of EF4, and 21 rated EF3. 207 tornadoes occurred on April 27th. This is the most ever in a 24-hour period. There were 324 fatalities and over 3,100 injuries, an estimated $12 billion in damage. Dr. Greg Forbes had the following to say about the tornado paths during the outbreak. Quote, they added up to an almost unfathomable 3,200 path miles, by far the greatest of any U.S. outbreak. This total path was over 600 miles longer than the April 3rd and 4th, 1974 super outbreak. We have a series of articles on some of the tornado events from the outbreak at tornadotalk.com. One summary covers the details of a violent tornado that raced for just over 30 miles across northeastern Alabama and into southern Tennessee. The hardest hit area was near Bridgeport, Alabama. EF4 damage occurred there, and several homes were leveled. Sadly, a 13-year-old boy, Brandon Warren, was killed, and several other people were injured in what is considered a forgotten event of the super outbreak. Calling all weather enthusiasts. Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band at amsweatherband.org. As an AMS Weatherband member, you'll get to go behind the scenes with the scientists of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll learn about the very latest research from the scientists who are actually doing it. What's more, you'll become a part of a passionate online community of weather enthusiasts. Get access to exclusive videos, webinars, and other fun content, and support the science you love. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
We appreciate the AMS and their support of the show with the Weather Band. I got my certificate right back here. I love my membership in that organization. And we also appreciate Midland Weather Radio for their support of the show. Bruce Jones is the national ambassador for Weather Radio. And Bruce, I know what I would have given when I was a 12-year-old when my aunt and mom were trying to keep us safe hanging out the back of a trailer looking at the clouds. what I would have given to have a weather radio back then. And I did get one in 1976, and there hasn't been a day since that I didn't have the protection of NOAA weather radio as my backbone, just in case I'm not paying attention. And that happens. James, you remember on my birthday a couple of years ago, a tornado hit Fultondale. I had finished whatever I was doing that night, the show here, and had gone on to a little birthday celebration, and without that weather radio that night, I might not have heard that warning because I didn't have weather duty then. So it is a critical component of anybody's weather preparedness program, is to have a way to get the warnings, and NOAA weather radio is the best.
Yeah, and it was very, very welcomed by the public and by broadcasters, as it came online, and, starting back in the 1960s, the 1970s. And then after the Palm Sunday outbreak of, 1991, when Al Gore came down and visited Piedmont, Alabama, and said, these things need to be as common as smoke detectors. And then there was another enormous push to get more weather radio transmitters and get more people on board with NOAA weather radio. But I can tell you, I'm approximately the same age as you are, Bill and James, and it was a game changer, a life changer for a lot of us to be able to have these instant warnings that came in, whether we had the TV or radio on or not. This little gizmo would wake us up or alert us or whatever, and tell us something bad was about to happen. And gosh, what a game changer it was. So the system's been operating now very well for more than 60 years, and it's still the backbone of our alerting system. And I've always encouraged everyone to have one. I know they're a little bit bothersome at times. We were just talking about false alarms and so forth. They can be a bother. But I'd rather be inconvenienced than be involved in a funeral for myself or a loved one. That little inconvenience of a weather radio is nothing to me. So we have a little special offer for you. For those of you who listen to WeatherBrains, you might want to take advantage of this. There's 25% offer when you go to midlandusa.com and use the promo code SPAN25. SPANN 25 is the promo code that you type in. And when you type that in, you can get 25% off of a weather radio. Now we have Mother's Day coming up here within the next month. We've got Father's Day the month after that. There's all sorts of reasons that you can give or gift a weather radio, and I would encourage you to do that. But if you're a listener to WeatherBrains, the most important thing that you can do is to help us spread the word about the NOAA Weather Radio Network. It's a free broadcast. You buy a little gizmo that listens for it, the weather radio, and then the broadcast is free. And it's information that comes direct from the National Weather Service office. So when Kevin Laws and his team push the button, a tornado warning for Coleman County or wherever, that weather radio goes off immediately. There's nothing faster than NOAA weather radio. So if you're a fan of WeatherBrains, the most important thing you can do to help us build a weather-ready nation is encourage people to have multiple redundant ways of getting these warnings. These are life-saving warnings, and they're usually issued minutes ahead of the tornado's arrival at your home. Please take advantage of this opportunity. Download the apps on your cell phone. If your county has a reverse 911 service where they will give you a call, sign up for that. Give them your landline phone, give them your cell phone. Make sure you keep those things up to date and look over them once a year and make sure that you're still signed up. But most importantly, have a NOAA weather radio too, because any system can fail. And this idea of having multiple redundant ways of getting these messages is extremely important. So please help us spread the word.
And, I do a school talk every day, Bruce, in every program at Weather Radio. And I'll ask those kids, how many of you have one of these things in your house? And even where we're in a very tornado prone area, I'd say maybe it's 2 in 10. And that's not good. We've got to do better than that. So you can help us by spreading the word. If you've got one, let your friends know, your family members know, and take advantage of that offer. But now's a great time to do that. So again, Bruce, thanks as always for being on the show here. Really quickly, I know we're late, but we just might have a little email to read quickly.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All righty, we have just three for you tonight. Nate Larson just wrote, and he was our friend up in Minnesota, and he was talking about some of the flooding that's occurred up there. It has been a mess up in the Dakotas and up into Minnesota with blizzards and then flooding and thunderstorms. And he was just letting us know here, things were pretty bad in the Crookston, Minnesota area, but folks have come out and they are not expecting them to break the record flooding set back in 1997. So that is good news. We also heard from Owen Isaacs, who gave us a reminder that on Monday, May 2nd, it is the Weather Channel's 40th anniversary. And I just maybe sit back for a minute and go, oh my goodness, how did we go 40 years now with the Weather Channel? And I just remember being the 12-year-old, watching Jim Cantori and tracking on my tracking chart and everything. How many of us have had that experience where we love weather because of the Weather Channel? So we appreciate that. And then, Bill, you brought up James Lewis's email about the hurricane names, and he had a few other facts for us here about some of the named hurricanes. That every storm to make landfall in the Atlantic since 2011 has caused at least $1 billion in property damage. So that's one stat. 4 of the 10 costliest Atlantic hurricanes have been storms: Irma, Ida, Ivan, and Ike. And this probably makes I the costliest letter overall. So that he sent us a group of stuff here. That's 2 of them. Folks, we thank you. We see all your emails, and we've had some great guest suggestions, and I know we're going to be working on those as well. And we just appreciate you sending us your weather forecasts and your guest suggestions. Email at weatherbrains.com, and make sure you get our newsletter too. You can sign up for that, and it gets to your email box every Thursday morning. So you can check out our great articles and history and stuff. So we have a lot going on with that.
Awesome. So Jen, while you've got the floor, let's do picks of the week. And again, we'll kind of fly through these. This topic is such a good one that these shows have been running long, but this is an important discussion to have. So again, we're sorry, we're a little long, but sometimes it happens. So Jen, while you have the floor, what's your pick of the week?
So my pick of the week is the article from tornadotalk.com that we put together of the overview of all the super outbreak summaries that we have written. And we have several of them that are free. And we do also have some that are under our premium membership. And we've covered several. We still have a few that we have to go. We are working on 2 new ones that are going to take a few months to get through because these are very large and very detailed. They're like little ebooks. But I'll tease, we're working on the Coleman tornado from 2011 and Flat Rock as well. And we've had some great talks with Chris Darden, who has just given us some wonderful information. So we are working on that. And so that's my pick of the week. Please check out some of our summaries the next few days.
Great. Jen, thank you so much. All right, Kim, what's your pick of the week?
Based on the conversation today, I was trying to find the most recent IBW evaluation and was having trouble finding the report, but I did find the conference presentation where the results of that report were given by Gina Esco and Joe Ripberger. It's a really great presentation if you're interested in the ins and outs of what we know about how those threat tags, at least the most recent evaluation, get distributed, who can use them, what are some of the trade-offs that have been explored. Great presentation to check out.
And I will do that. That's great. Thanks, Kim. Troy, what's your pick of the week?
Foghorn.
Oh, wow. Whoa.
Caught you.
Yeah. All right. Was not quite ready for that, but I am now. So good deal. All right. Let's go to Rick Smith. Rick, what you got?
Mine is from the Insurance Institute for Business, Home, and Safety. It's a webpage with just some really super simple, low-cost, last-minute preparation tips for severe weather. Things as simple as making sure your garage door is closed all the way, closing all your interior doors, and things like that. They do a lot of great work, and they've got some really good user-friendly safety information. So that's my pick.
Excellent. All right. Bruce, what's your pick of the week this week?
Well, I think the concept behind a tornado emergency is almost to say, hey, we think this is an F4 or F5 tornado. We think this is a really bad one coming. And so I'll take you back to 1996 and a little movie that came out that year where they were looking at radar and they were looking up in the sky and they were proclaiming that such and such a tornado was an F4 and F5. And of course, the movie was Twister. So maybe Twister was very prescient in seeing the future coming, that perhaps we're to the point where we can meteorologically identify what could potentially be an F4, F5 tornado and therefore issuing a tornado emergency.
There you go. I like it a lot. Great pick, Bruce. All right. So Kevin and Stefan, we have stalled long enough for you guys to come up with something. So Stefan, let's go to you. Give us a good pick of the week, something good, weather related.
My pick of the week is a recent journal article on weather and forecasting published by Jamie Beecher and Evan Bentley on WSR 88D side lobe contamination from a conceptual model to diagnostic strategies for improving NWS warning performance. It's a really good read.
That is a great read for all of us that deal with severe weather. But that
sounds like a good show topic.
No, that is a great show topic. I mean, that's outstanding. All right, Kevin, what you got for us?
We were 2 days away from the anniversary of April 27th that our folks here last year put together a really good story map and storyboard, and we're highlighting it again this year. We worked with surrounding offices to highlight the names and the faces of the people that we lost that day. And I'm afraid, James, that we're getting to a point now where it's beginning the next generation. I was over at Mississippi State a couple weeks back with you and looking around at some of the students. I kind of wondered, do they even remember that day? We're kind of getting to that point. I know you dealt with it with the early 70s. You get to the point where people start to forget again. And I think we're going to get to that point very soon here with 2011. You can't go around mentioning it like we used to. So that's my pick this week. So thank them for doing that.
Yeah, and that's a great site. And again, I'll just say my pick. Last year, we talked about what are you going to do for the 10th anniversary, and I finally said, let's do this. Just put me out in the studio. I don't want scripts. I don't want reporters. I don't want anything. I don't want to be constrained by time. I don't want a 30-minute slot or a 60-minute slot. Just put me out there. And I basically ad-libbed a special with some really good video elements. And that's my pick of the week that looked back on April 27th, 2011, a year ago. So that's my pick. All right, Bill Murray, what you got for us?
I'm never without a pick just by turning around to my bookcase and getting Tim Vasquez's books. This is the orange one, the Weather Radar Handbook. And it's just spectacular reading especially for amateur meteorologists, and certainly not a bad thing to have on the reference shelf for professionals too. And what he does every night at 8 p.m. Central on YouTube, his Meteorology Lab, is a fabulous show for learning as he covers current weather in great detail. So that's my pick. James, next week, going to have a fun show. Professional meteorologist, YouTuber Ryan Hall, y'all, will be with us. He has over 500,000 followers on YouTube. And he is a guest whose appearance is born out of the recommendation of Jen's Chipmunks. And so they've been working hard and behind the scenes. It's going to be a great, fun show. Kim, I think you got show 851 with Eric Sorensen, right? That's going to be a lot of fun. A meteorologist who is running for Congress. Is that correct? That's
correct.
That's one political platform we can support. We'll talk about the history of the monthly weather review the following week. And then Dennis Felgen from the Weather Service from the Hurricane Center will be having his WeatherBrains retirement party on Monday, May the 23rd. So I'm looking forward to that. And Bob Henson's going to join us and talk about famous TV weathercasters on the 31st. That's just some of the guests that are coming up on WeatherBrains, James.
And you, sir, are doing an amazing job as the guest booking officer. I mean, where else are you going to get all this talent here? But let me just say to everybody, Stefan and Kevin, thank you all for talking about this subject. We wanted to expand it from last week, and I think it was important. And again, thanks to both of you. I really appreciate y'all's time. Thank you all for being here.
Yep.
And on that note, we've got to wrap this thing up. We've been on the air for like 6 hours, I think. Typically, we're not quite this long-winded, but sometimes we are. We record WeatherBrains Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, and you can watch it. A lot of people watch it over at live.bigbrainsmedia.com. But we know that most of you listen, and we thank you whether you watch or listen. If you'd like to respond to anything you've heard tonight or make a comment, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. We'd love to hear from you. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thank you for listening. Have a great week and God bless. Thanks, everybody.
I didn't have the heart to tell Stefan going into it that the show sometimes lasted 90 minutes, maybe 105.
That's right.
And if he had really fact checked my proposition there,
Exactly. He
would have
never
known
knew
we
what
were
he
in
was
trouble.
getting into here.
But thanks for sticking
Well-
around to the end, Stefan.
Yeah.
Oh, no
Thanks,
worries.
Kevin.
No,